Hey, what is up? Welcome to this episode of the Entrepreneur to Entrepreneur podcast. As always, I'm your host, Brian Lofermento. And if you ever find yourself sitting there thinking, what are the broader ramifications of AI and technology and all of these advancements, not only in business, but in society and in the world? Well, then we are all in for a real treat with today's guest and fellow entrepreneur, because this is someone who is asking those big questions and who is actively part of the solution in ushering in a better tomorrow, a tomorrow that brilliant minds like today's guest are already thinking about. So I'm very excited to introduce you to Ian Newell. Ian is the founder and CEO of Golden Hour Technologies, which is a pioneering company integrating cutting-edge AI analytics, secure communications, and high-performance computing to transform operations in very important industries such as defense, maritime, logistics, and homeland security. Ian's entrepreneurial vision is deeply informed by his extensive military background, serving 9 years in the U.S. Army and officially in over 1,200 episodes. This is the first person who in any capacity has worked with the U.S. Space Force, including a combat deployment for the Army to Iraq and Syria as an intelligence officer. These experiences profoundly shaped his understanding of how critical, accurate, timely information and reliable technology are in life and death scenarios. Following his military service, Ian accelerated his career in technology innovation, initially joining BigBear.ai, where he began as a business development account executive before quickly advancing to head of product for autonomous systems. Since then, he's worked at Saab Inc., contributing significantly to the innovation that's happening there. He was serving as the head of product and growth, focused specifically on autonomous vessel technologies. So when we talk about AI, and you might be thinking, how is it going to create my social media schedule? Well, Ian's thinking about some pretty big problems and some pretty big solutions in the world that impact all of us. And I know it's going to give us a lot of food for thought in our own businesses. So I'm excited about this one. I'm not going to say anything else. Let's dive straight into my interview with Ian Newell. All right, Ian, I am so very excited that you're here with us today. First things first, welcome to the show.
Hey, Brian, thanks. It's great to be here.
Heck yes. I feel like I did a little bit of a spoiler for listeners because you have just about one of the coolest backgrounds that I've ever heard of, and I'm so excited to hear how it plays into the way that you think, the way you see the world, and the way that you run your business. So take us beyond the bio. Who's Ian? How did you start doing all these cool things?
Yeah, I really appreciate that. I've been so fortunate. I've probably had one of the best careers I could ever imagine for myself. You know, I spent a lot of time thinking that the roadblocks that I went into, the experiences that I went through, you know, they were hard at the time, but looking back, it's completely formed where I am today. As you said, I did 9 years in the military, 4 years infantry, and then I transitioned over to intelligence after that. Had a combat deployment, which really shaped my entire career. I did just a little over 13 months between Iraq and Syria, and I actually rotated between 3 jobs. One was as basically an aide and an advisor to the 2-star, it was then Felix Gedney from the UK forces, and basically I got to travel with him. I spoke to 32 ambassadors and really had to understand the high-level big picture, particularly as drone warfare was starting to take off for the first time. And we were starting to have some issues with our own drone tech. And I got to see firsthand from a strategic perspective how that was impacted. And I got to see the transition from the old school drones to some of the newer ones during my 2017 timeframe. I transitioned from that to be the lead targeteer in Iraq and Syria. So I started dealing with dispersed data sets and some of the introductions of the first kinds of machine learning AI techniques into a combat zone. And then I finished up as a tactical level intelligence officer on the border of Iraq and Syria for the final fight against ISIS, where I got to see everything I worked from at the strategic level all the way down to the tactical level, what the ramifications and implications were. And I think we'll get into it, but I decided it was time to get out of the military. I wanted to do something else with my life, and I've had a fantastic role model with my father, who did 33 years in the military, transitioned to building his own company himself. And so I had a conversation with him when I was looking to start getting out, and he's like, do it. And his advice was to do a 1,000 cups of coffee journey, which is 1,000 different conversations with a broad spectrum of folks. I'm actually starting my second one now. And I have notes from every single conversation I had that formulated into my next steps into Big Bear, Saab, and then into my current company today.
Yeah, I love that overview. There are so many different directions I want to go in with you today, but you've got to introduce listeners to Golden Hour Technologies. Ian, when I read the blurb about what it is that you guys do, it's very clear to me. I'm just like, this is a little bit over my head. There's some really advanced technology that you're working with, but what really stands out to me is that it's cutting edge and it's going to impact everybody. I mean, there's so many real world applications to the technologies that are quickly evolving. So introduce us to Golden Hour Technologies.
Yeah, and I'll preface this with it. We've probably had about 20 pivots since I started. When I left Saab, fantastic organization, by the way, and they were so kind in my journey into building my own company. But when I was leaving, I started to recognize that there was a major problem with maritime autonomy. If you looked at ground autonomy, so your Waymos of the world, your new Tesla, et cetera, the infrastructure came first. And if you look at space autonomy, while it's a little bit amorphous than that, there was some infrastructure placed first. When it came to maritime autonomy, the autonomy came first. And what I mean by that is that the technology for the vessels themselves came before the surrounding infrastructure that can tie everything together. And I discovered this when I was at Big Bear AI. I built with a fantastic team a analytics suite that basically fused 15 different unmanned surface vessels data sets to include video and computer vision onto one platform. And an older platform, a common operation picture, so that the commander in Task Force 59 at Bahrain could actually see all 15 vessels working simultaneously in different places. Because before, it was a whole lot of engineering and readapting every single vessel to fit inside of one common operation picture. We didn't have that problem in Iraq and Syria when I was there. That had already been solved, and I was shocked to see that there wasn't a positive communication from the Army to the Navy and lessons learned in combat. So when I came into the Navy side of things, I started recognizing, okay, there's a whole lot of really cool tech. There's amazing vessels out there, and the innovations come every single minute of every single day. But there's very few organizations out there that are looking at the, frankly, the non-sexy side of things, right? The infrastructure is not super cool. The communications is not super cool. Everybody wants to see the boat drive fast, avoid objects, and that's great and that's amazing. But how do we actually turn this capability into something that people can live and operate with every single day? And one of the challenges that really spun Golden Hour Technologies out was the communication side of it. A lot of these vessels are relying on Starlink, or they're relying on very expensive SATCOM, and they're having to take a lot of their bandwidth piping video or other complex sensors. And there was really a two-pronged essence of why we pivoted to the communication side. And it was core to my deployment time was, how do you take the critical information that you need minimum level of information to make a positive decision, depending on your environment or what's going on. So I can set the stage for the Gulf of America, Gulf of Mexico, wherever you stand, right? I know we're worldwide. But for that region, autonomous vessels are operating every single day. But nobody knows which vessels are operating where at a given time. So if we have an incident today in the Gulf and there's an emergency, typically what happens is the Coast Guard will radio. It's somebody that's as close as possible. It could be a merchant ship, it could be an oil tanker, it could be, you name it, right? They're going to call them to go respond. Almost every single time they go and respond, they provide first aid and immediate response, or at least can confirm or deny if it's a real threat. But what happens when we have a bunch of autonomous vessels out there? We can't answer that, because we don't know which autonomous vessels are working with the oil rigs, which ones are working with defense sector, which ones are working with Mexico, which ones are working, throughout the entire Caribbean. And so what we looked at with Golden Hour Technologies is how do we pipe very low amount of data sets, long distance with low power, so that it could be fused together into one common software product. So have it vertically integrated from hardware to software, and then be able to pipe data without internet, without Bluetooth, over long range. So that obviously can stretch into the logistics environment, can stretch into defense and national security. But the catalyst that caused us to pivot to this was, how do we operationalize and integrate autonomous efforts in the maritime sector with day-to-day folks.
Yeah, it's so interesting hearing that perspective, and it gives us real life insights into how siloed things are, how inaccessible a lot of data is. I mean, there's so many different considerations, and of course, technology is the bridge in all of those solutions. And I think it's so cool seeing the fact that you've taken your military background, you've taken your technical background and technological background, and really combined all of those aspects into a company that focuses on real world solutions. Ian, what I'm super curious about is, you obviously think about these things on a way larger scope. I said it a little bit in jest at the top of the episode about how most people are asking themselves small questions about AI. How can AI write my social media post? So they find small answers. It seems to me like you're asking these huge questions, and I'm going to interject, and it's a little bit of a leading question, but I know you'll have some really interesting insights there, is that I would imagine being in combat, serving in the military, overseas, gives you this vantage point on life about what really matters and those big questions that you need to find those big answers to. How's that shaped the way that you're viewing technology and the way that you're viewing AI, and of course leading into your business? Because it just seems like it's a big level and it's a big challenge that you're taking on, but it's because it's a big problem that you're looking to solve.
Yeah, it's a great question. I would tell you that from my experience in the past few years in the commercial AI sector, the amount of growth during this time frame has been monumental. It's very hard to keep up. And you'll find a common theme when I talk to you today is, I am not the smartest guy out there. I've got my experience, I've got my background, and I've been very fortunate in what I've been able to learn. But really what's helped me stay ahead is just talking to people. I find it's, I stop for a while making time for other folks and just having good conversations. And I found that I ended up 6 months to a year behind on the current technology. So now I build in every single day, hour, 2 hour windows so I can just go have conversations with folks. And it's all walks of life. I mean, I've had conversations with, startup founders that are 15 years old. I've talked to, industry titans. I've talked to sports, individuals. It's particularly when it comes to AI, it's fascinating when you talk to all these walks of life and understand how they're looking at it, how they're framing it, and then how are they looking to expand on it. And I will say some of my most fascinating conversations have come from young college students. You think about it, the new generation of folks at the level of technology and access that they're having are coming up with some of the coolest and most innovative concepts when it comes to artificial intelligence, machine learning, simulation, and they're starting to come up with things very quickly because they have access and they understand how to manipulate the technology. And they understand the limitations. And I think that's the other big thing is that, everybody's, everybody, it's a broad term. There's a lot of folks, and there's a lot of news that's talking about AI taking jobs and AI, really not being a positive force for us. And I think that, there's obviously some credentials behind that, and it makes sense in some stances. But, I think LLMs in particular is probably the easiest place to talk about it in the AI ML space, where you talk about limitations. You'll see a lot of folks toss out LLMs and say, okay, I added LLMs, it's going to fix everything. It's easier to look at LLMs and realize that it helps break down vast amount of information and helps you understand it. I don't see that really expanding in the next 2 years. And so when we're talking about AI ML, which is easy to crisscross, I would say it's talking to folks that are actually working on it every day, so you understand the limitations. And when you understand the limitations, and you understand the consequences, you can understand how to manipulate it, adapt it. Because as entrepreneurs, as you well know, we break the rules. But in order to break the rules, you got to understand how the thing works to a core.
Yeah, I love the way you answered that, Ian, especially because you're obviously teasing listeners a little bit with some details from your 1,000 Cups of Coffee journey, and I do want to talk about that. But before we get there, I love the fact that you called out college students as part of that new frontier. I'm learning so much, even my friends who have kids that are in high school, I can't help but ask high schoolers. I hang out in coffee shops a lot. Around 2 or 3 o'clock, it's all high school kids that walk into local coffee shops here in Tampa, and I always ask them, like, what are your teachers doing? For all of you who are just using AI when you go home, it's so interesting because they live in it. Ian, you and I didn't grow up in the world of having AI. I didn't have a Facebook until I was in college. And so we were at that cutting edge of that technology. This is such a new frontier. And picking on that topic and staying on that topic, the new frontier, obviously, if we remain in our own little bubble, we are forever limited by our own little bubble. You have made your bubble so much wider and broader with your 1,000 Cups of Coffee journey. Talk to us about that. And what I'm particularly interested there is, what are those conversations looking like? How are you framing them with people? What types of questions are you asking? Are you hoping for some sort of outcome, or is this just the most open-ended journey of all time?
Yeah, I'll give you a couple minutes on my first 1,000 Cups of Coffee journey, because it was that impactful, and I'll lead into my second one afterwards. But the first one, so what happened was I was coming out of the military, and I had always saw myself being a 20-year, doing a full career. My dad is highly successful. He's a war hero. Did his time in Fallujah, Iraq. That was my whole life. And so I treated my life in such a way that I didn't expand myself outside. And frankly, even as I was getting out, like, you got some folks that are allies that are helping you transition, but transition process is hard. It's really hard. One of the advice that I got from multiple folks is like, leaving something that's so comfortable, can feel like a breakup. And it was. I got out, and I didn't know what to wear. I didn't know. I knew how to put a resume together, but I didn't know how to translate it from military experience to commercial speak. I didn't know how to operate day to day without putting the uniform on. And it's almost like, what's your personality? Who are you without the uniform? Which you could think all day long. You got a personality, and you hang out on the weekends and do things. But like at the end of the day, when it's every single day of your life, and you're trying to transition into a commercial industry that's it's fluid. You have to go learn. So my dad told me to go talk to 1,000 people, and I decided not to take a job during that time frame. And I actually went all the way down to my last $500 in my bank account, going this direction. So my first 250 conversations were really focused about, who am I? How do I operate in this world? Like, what do I wear to interviews? How do you do interviews? I'll never forget, I think I was like 20 conversations in, and I was starting to talk to some friends of friends and whatnot, and I ended up talking to a senior executive at a very, very, very large technology company. He was a vice president at the time, I think soon to be president, and I was like, hey, can you teach me and coach me on my resume? And I got the feedback of, I would never hire you. You don't know how to speak anything but military. And I was shocked. I thought I had refined it enough, but it took that level of direct feedback to start improving on things. And as I started expanding to like 250 to 500 to 750 conversations, I started talking to folks in all walks of life. Everything in the AI space. Like, I don't have a technical background. I have a bachelor's in political science, and then I've got an MBA as of May. So my technical experience all came from being directly exposed and talking to folks and learning from them. But from 250 to 750, it was all about expanding to other organizations. And so, for instance, like, I'd never been exposed to private equity and venture capital. And so once I started talking to those folks and learning, like, a conversation would be, what are you really excited about your portfolio right now? What technology out there gets you amped? Who's your favorite company? Who's a company that you wish you had invested in and hadn't, and why? And those conversations always trickled into, let me introduce you to the next 5 or 6 people you should talk to. And so I captured all these notes into an Excel sheet, color-coded it so that it told me when to respond to folks again if I hadn't talked to them in 90 days or so. And that's what started getting me exposed to space, artificial intelligence, autonomy, big data, small data, etc. And it's an entire realm of technology that I never thought I would break into with a non-technical background and a very minimal understanding at the early days. Now, when I got bored with it, I started finding celebrities on LinkedIn and waited until I was second connected, and then I'd reach out and start talking to them. I had a really good fortune to talk to a few celebrities and learn purely about like their life transitions and what they learned about it and how they implemented it in their day-to-day lives. And then the final 250 conversations really took a big pivot towards, okay, I need to figure out what I'm going to be when I grow up. And those final 250, like I said, I broke down all the way to my last $500. I was interning with the Space Force. I was helping manage a couple of their space technology accelerators and helping launch their innovation ecosystem called SpaceWorks. And it was down to my last 500, and somebody told me, you should go to this conference at Texas A&M that's focused on something called JADC2. I didn't even know what JADC2 was. It was a military acronym, something about data, something about AI. I was like, sure, why not? So I spent my last 500, got a hotel room, and frankly, I got kind of bored 2 days into it. So I went to go do some work at frankly, it was a local dive bar. And while I was there, a group of 5 guys walked in, all dressed up, obviously here for the conference. So I was like, all right, I'm down to my last few conversations. I might as well get them done now. I ended up talking to them all night, and I always credit him, Rob Weeder's, Weeds for short. He told me at the end of that conversation, I'd love to hire you. And I remember telling him very distinctly that you don't want to hire me. I don't even know how to spell AI. I'm the wrong guy for this job. He reached out to me a week later on LinkedIn and said, no, really, I want to interview you. I told him no, and then he got my phone number from somebody and called me. He said, hey, I'm setting you up for your interview. And I was like, all right, if you went and got my phone number, you enjoyed the story that much, fine, I'll do it. So I interviewed with a man named Greg Goldwater, who would later become probably one of my most influential bosses I've ever had. And after my interview, and he was a hard guy to talk to in that first interview, and he came out after that interview and said, Ian, I would never hire you for this role. And I was like, great, yep, I know. He's like, but I'm going to build you a new one. And that's how I ended up at Big Bear AI, working as a senior account executive focused on building sales pipelines and growth pipelines for the Navy and the Space Force for an AI company. So I wrapped that one up, and it was doing my job. I continued loosely having conversations while I was working through the jobs as I was learning more, but I adapted it more for internal to my company. And that's what got me leading to the head of product, where basically I pulled every engineer aside and I'd spend 30 minutes to an hour talking to every single engineer about every single aspect of the tech. Because I felt like you couldn't sell something you didn't understand how it works. which you'll see is a common thing. And after talking to a few engineers, signing up for a hackathon, I ended up building a team of 25 to build that software suite that I alluded to earlier. So that 1,000 cups of coffee didn't end. It's always continued. There's just been breaks in the formality on it.
Yeah, I love that. So many cool takeaways from there. Ian, it makes me want to ask you, this is probably a part philosophical question, but for sure entrepreneur to entrepreneur question. And that is, clearly conversations have been such a core part of your own growth personally and professionally. I want to know what the conversations with Ian Newell look like. When you are alone and you're thinking about those conversations in your head, what are those questions? Because I'm sure part of those conversations are shaped by all the conversations that came before and all of your life experiences. What do those questions and conversations look like internally?
Yeah, are you asking about how I prep for the next conversation, or are you?
No, I want to know Ian Newell, the entrepreneur. I want to get inside that mind of yours.
Yeah, the takeaways from all that and what I work through day to day now is, as I talked to before, I'm not the smartest person in the room, but you better believe I surround myself with the smartest people in the room. And so as I'm approaching the lessons learned I've had from other startup founders, VCs, private equity, etc., everything always came down to the company failed because the team failed. And I didn't necessarily believe it when I first heard VCs tell me they invest in teams. And that's been the focus. As I come out of those conversations and I'm looking at, okay, how do I translate this into my day-to-day? How do I translate this into my company? A lot of it's focused on culture and hiring the right folks appropriately, and particularly in a space like AI. You could have a team of 25 that gets outperformed by a team of 3, and how do you keep that team of 3? You keep them happy, but keeping people happy changes every single month in this environment now, right? Particularly as competition for these engineers. Competition for these innovation folks, starts expanding. It's how do you retain folks and build a culture that people want to stay? And I think one of the things that I learned, and one of the misconceptions that I learned, was a lot of companies talk about they're going to buy into the mission. They're going to sign up for the mission, and they're going to be they're either for the mission or they're not, and they shouldn't be here if they're not. I think it's a poor move, right? And I think it's a bad assumption when you expect all of your employees to always dedicate themselves to the mission, right? Like, you also have to, on top of the mission, on top of the values, have to create an environment where these folks want to stay. And if the mission changes, how do you keep these guys? How do you keep these folks? So that's what I ask every single day. Is how do I make it a better workplace environment? And then how do I surround myself with people that are far smarter than me? Because happy people that are far smarter create really, really cool technology.
Yeah, spoken like a true founder and CEO. That's why I was so excited to ask you that question. I don't usually ask that on the air, especially since every listener knows that these are totally off the cuff, spontaneous, so you didn't have any prep for any of that. But it's really cool to hear that's what you're focused on, because that's going to dictate your results, not just today and tomorrow, but 6 months from now, 12 months from now. So I think it's really powerful how intentional we can be with our own thoughts and the own conversations we have internally. So Ian, you have given us so much food for thought today that I have no idea how you're going to answer this last question. It's super broad and you've already dropped so much knowledge on us, but I have to ask, what's your best piece of advice for listeners? Knowing we're being listened to by both entrepreneurs and entrepreneurs at all different stages of their own personal and professional growth journeys, what's that one piece of advice that you want to leave them with today?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing I've learned is, one, entrepreneurship is really hard. It's hard. It's rewarding. It's the best thing I've ever done. I love the flexibility, but it's also the hardest thing I've ever done. And some of the best advice I got was, make sure you are mentally and physically ready in order to build your company or scale your company. Because every time you scale, you also got to be ready. Because at the end of the day, like if you're running that company, you're leading it, you have people depending on you. whether that's for a paycheck or whether it's for, or if you took VC investment or private equity investment or a lot of folks are relying on you to return value. And in order to return value, you've got to have the mental and physical health there. And then, as I talked about before, surround yourself with really, really smart people. Be humble and be flexible.
Yes, important advice all around. And it's advice that we need to heed, I would argue, not just once, Ian, but we need constant reminders of these things. And I'm so grateful for you bringing those words of wisdom to our audience here today in over 150 countries. I often remind myself about how cool that is, that we get to be the change that we want to see in the world, and we get to be that beacon of light. And you and I were talking off air about how much we believe that entrepreneurs are the ones that push the envelope forward. And you've displayed exactly why here in today's conversation. So I'm so appreciative of that. I'm also appreciative of the fact that I know that you are so open to connection and relationships. So with that in mind, for listeners who want to reach out to you and follow along with all the meaningful and important and innovative work that you and your team are doing, drop those links on us. Where should listeners go from here?
Yeah, absolutely. So you can look up Golden Hour Technologies Inc. on LinkedIn. I'm also open for connection. Ian Newell. You'll see me with Ladybird Lake in my background for Austin, Texas. But happy to connect or talk. And then my email is inewell, Newell, at goldenhour.tech.
Yes, and listeners, you already know the drill. We're making it as easy as possible for you to find those links down below in the show notes, no matter where it is that you're tuning into today's episode. You already know that Ian loves surrounding himself by incredible people and great entrepreneurs and really smart thinkers. So if you want an incredible entrepreneur in your network as well, don't be shy. Most listeners are. I know this from being on the air for more than 1,200 episodes. Most people are way too shy to take action, but be inspired by Ian's move of adding celebrities on LinkedIn and messaging them. That's one of my favorite stories that you shared with us today, Ian. So listeners, don't be shy. Otherwise, Ian, on behalf of myself and all the listeners worldwide, thanks so much for coming on the show today.
Thanks, Brian. Appreciate you. Had a great time.